Throughout the history of the game, we have talked about the number 3 position as the most important. But openers were generally teams' best batters when we started Test cricket. By the 1900s though, number 3s had caught up with them. In terms of runs made, these two traded places a few times after that, until the 1920s and 30s when Don Bradman, George Headley and Wally Hammond made number 3 the undisputed greatest batting position in terms of runs. After the war, the openers dropped off and the position with the most runs was held by number 3 position for a long time. But then in the 90s, something weird started to happen. Many teams stopped automatically putting their best players at number 3, such as Tendulkar, Brian Charles Lara and Jacques Kallis all moved down a spot to 4. Soon teams were talking about how their best bat should be at second drop. And now we have a situation where teams are more likely to have their best player at second drop and not first. This is, in the history of our game, a fairly big shift. Number 3s have the highest score in Test cricket, and they have faced 9,148 innings. Yet despite batting almost 200 fewer innings, number 4s have an almost identical amount of runs in the history of the game as number 3s do. In almost 3,000 tests really, number 4s have managed to score only 753 fewer runs than their up the order friends. If this trend continues, very soon number 4s will have scored the most runs in Test cricket. If you look at averages though, number 4s have just taken over as the best spot to go in. Openers have been on the decline for a while, and number 5s have been very fun of recent times. But where does that leave the number 3 position in Test cricket right now? As a cricket journalist, I would travel sometimes up to 200 days a year. I loved watching cricket games. I loved going to new countries. It was an absolute dream. But there was one thing I hated more than anything else about it, and it was this little pin. The thing that I need to change my SIM card in every new country. The absolute worst thing about this pin and SIM cards is when I was traveling to the West Indies, of having to arrive in every new island or country and having to work out if I could still find this pin and then line up and get my SIM card in every single airport. Well, now we have the answer thanks to Sally. They can make it so you never have to worry about this nonsense ever again. They use an eSIM app that once you install once, it is easy, simple, and cheap. Oh, and it works in more than 160 countries. And you can throw these pins away forever, because now you just need to download the Sally app before your trip. And if you do it with our code, Good Areas, you get an exclusive 15% discount on Sally eSIM data plans. So before your next holiday or work trip or any time you have to travel to another country, download the Sally app and use the code Good Areas, or one word, at checkout, and you can travel like a pro with Sally. England decided to try Jacob Bethel at number 3, despite the fact that he only played 20 first-class matches before and had never batted there domestically. They obviously don't worry too much about these kinds of things, as Ollie Pope wasn't a first drop before he was picked for that position as well. But Bethel was a lot more full on, as he had batted more at number 9 than number 3. In fact, the little experience he had was really at 6 and 7, whereas Pope was a middle order player who's going slightly higher. Bethel's numbers look more like an all-rounder when looking at his spots. Of course, England look at these things differently. Sometimes they take a scientific approach and they check how a player might go against different types of bowling, and then they project how that will go in tests. Sometimes they roll a 28-sided dice and go for the vibes. Ben Jones of CricViz once suggested that Chris Woakes could bat at number 3 as a pinch number 3, in part because England didn't have any other options. This isn't quite that, but it's in the same genealogy. When there are no number 3s around, why not find someone who fits your mantra rather than a player who would likely fail anyway? But it is true that England are taking a big swing with their number 3 position at the moment. And if you look at history, it's actually not a place that they've ever been that great at. Opening has always been their thing, and the first and second drop positions have actually always underperformed for them compared to the rest of Test cricket. England has often gone for a number 3 as more of a backup opener rather than the automatic best bat that a lot of teams would try. And this makes sense because of their conditions. But if you look at all Test cricket, the player with the most runs at number 3 is Kumar Sangakkara. On this list of players with 3,000 runs in that position, you can find 6 Australians, 5 West Indians, 2 each from Pakistan and India, then a Kiwi and a South African, all before you even get to the first English batter. Other than the fact that the West Indies and Australia have produced a lot of greats, they've gone out of their way to bat them at number 3. Players like Ian Chappell, Ron Kanai, Ricky Ponting and Viv Richards feel like they were born to bat in that position. But had they been from other countries, it may not have been like that. certainly if they were English, because England has never had a player come in at 3 more than 78 times, and that was Mark Butcher. Even in their great eras after the war, they rarely kept anyone in that spot for more than a few games in a row. You have to go pre-war to find their highest scorer, Wally Hammond. But on the all-time list, he comes in at 19th, with Jonathan Trott having scored the 21st most runs in this position as well. This is just the English players, and just for scale, I've kept Kumar Sangakkara on this list because it looks funny. He's basically 4 times the highest English player. And it would take combining Wally Hammond, Jonathan Trott, Ted Dexter, Mark Butcher, and Ken Barrington all together to go past him. But there is another reason I showed you this. Hammond was a best bat in your team kind of number 3. But outside of that, you'll see a lot of Trott, Butcher, Nasser Hussain, and Bill Edrick, all of which are more backup openers. So traditionally, England either went for a very good player or a backup opener. Jacob Bethel is neither of those things. But of course, picking a backup opener at bat at number 3 is no longer easy, as finding one opener who can make runs in Test cricket is no longer easy. With the Kookaburras juiced up and everyone perfecting the wobble ball, batting anywhere in the top order is incredibly tough. No one is making runs. And you certainly don't want your number 3 to be your best bat anymore because they're probably just going to go out. In fact, in the last 5 years, every single top order position has fallen off a lot. But as you go further into the order, the differences aren't that big. By the time you get to number 7s, whatever is happening with the ball isn't as much of an issue. And I don't think anything here justifies England picking a new number 3, but it does explain why they are taking the gamble. Think about the Fab Four, who are now coming to a close, but their batting positions are the most important things here. They are all number 4s except for Kane Williamson. 40 years ago, all are probably batting one spot higher, although in Joe Root's case, if he played about 60 years ago, he would have batted in every position in the batting order, because that's what England used to do. But the point being here is the backup opener idea doesn't work, and the best players are saying, we can make more runs at 4. So where does that leave us with the number 3 position? This is a list of everyone with 500 runs at number 3 in the last 5 years. It is not a long list. Marnus Labuschagne is number 1. He feels like a modern number 3 in a way that Cheteshwar Pujara was. Not your best bat, but a player with a very good defense who could shield the number 4 from the new ball and is still high class. Williamson is New Zealand's best bat, but outside of when Root batted at 3, no one else on this list could claim to be their team's best player. Pope was a middle order player who was promoted to shield Root, and because England had just so many players who could bat in those lower positions. Shubman Gill is not really a backup opener, but more an opener in waiting. Chanto is there on potential, and that was something that we never really saw all that much before in cricket. Even talented youngsters would start down the order more often. Now we throw in a player without many runs and hope for the best. Kusal Mendels was probably another one along those lines. Pakistan has 2 backup openers on this list, and Keegan Peterson was a domestic number 3 who was probably never going to work at this level, but they weren't making any runs, so they gave him a go. And with all due respect to these players who are doing their best in a very tough era, of course, with all due respect is something we say when we're about to slander people, this is not a list that includes people like Bradman, Kumar, and Viv, is it? And if you think about Australia's problem right now, in their top 3, they have an older player out of form in Usman Khawaja. Nathan McSweeney has been promoted because he made runs in the middle order for South Australia, and Marnus Labuschagne, who is clinging onto the position. Yet conversely, think of their middle order. Smith and Cameron Green can both bat at 4, so could McSweeney or Inglis. At 5, they will keep Head, but as a backup, they have Aaron Hardy. At 6 is Mitchell Marsh, but they have Bo Webster as his understudy. And you see this with so many teams around the world at the moment. There is a global shortage of top order players. No one is making runs at 1, 2, and 3 domestically. And the players who've added the most runs do it from lower down the order. And then when they get to Test cricket, they get promoted. New Zealand's Will Young is their number 4 for Central Districts, but he bats in the top 3 for the Kiwis almost all the time. Tristan Stubbs has batted number 3 in 8 matches in his first class career. All but 2 of those are in tests. So now what we see is batters make runs down the order, or at least look like they can, and they end up in what we used to talk about as the most prestigious and difficult position in the game. And they're doing that in an era where it is harder than ever before. The first 20 overs of test matches used to be easier around 2009 and 2010. The game has gone from nearly averaging 40 some years to not even getting close to 30. That is extreme. Which also tells you that teams probably moved their best bats away from number 3 with very decent timing, because it has been harder than hell since then. So of course, what you would need now is someone with a good defensive game, in an era where no one seems to be able to block the ball all that well. or you need someone to pinch hit and maybe cause some chaos, because you really want your two strongest batters now at 4 and 5. You're just hoping to buy them some time or soften the balls a little bit before they come in. But it's weird because we still talk about number 3s as players that dictate the match, make an impact, counterattack, or stonewall. And the truth is that for a very long time, number 3s have just been struggling. In fact, for 5 decades, number 4s have been on top of number 3s when it comes to averages. And sometimes by a lot. But I don't think the real story here is the number 4s. It's the number 5s. Traditionally, number 5s were not seen to be your greatest players. They were either specialists or players who couldn't really handle the newer ball. They were essentially not good enough to bat higher, right? That's why they're in that position. So it made sense that their averages were always lower, even if the actual position was easier than batting up the order. But 3 of the last 4 decades, number 5s have out-averaged the players at first drop. This decade is the biggest difference ever. Right now, batting at number 3 is not an impact position. It's not even a backup opener. If anything, it's just hope. The players who are really living large at the moment are those number 5s. Test cricket has changed a lot when those two spots have completely swapped roles. Number 3s was once the spot of Don Bradman, and things change. It is unfair on Jacob Bethel to be compared to the great number 3s of the past. But it's also unfair that anyone has to bat first drop right now. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.